Honor? Most people don't know the meaning of the word. Most of us were taught that honor is the most important quality of an American patriot, but now I'm not so sure about that. Yesterday afternoon, Clay Shaw, the founder of the International Trade Mart, had passed away, the only man to be put on trial for conspiring to assassinate the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. They found Shaw not guilty, and goddammit, I can't keep silent about this any longer. The words of Jim Garrison have left me with a guilty conscience, and now I must tell you what I know. I will be giving you all the facts and all the details about this audacious plot, how it is all connected for what really happened on November 22nd of 1963. The truth is quite a conundrum, so listen carefully. I was born in the suburbs of Boston in the summer of 1918, and spent some of the earliest parts of my life drawing, reading, and building snow forts. Things were pleasant for the first 8 years or so, but in 1927, just before my 9th birthday, my father moved our family to Chicago to start a new job opportunity, forcing me to say goodbye to my friends in our old neighborhood. We then settled in a much dirtier neighborhood than before, with a higher crime rate, but it was fine for a family with a husband/father who was starting a new job. As I grew older, I became more interested in my father's business. My father worked as a salesman in Boston before he became the owner of a small meatpacking factory. My father would then show me the ropes, taught me how to run the whole business. He showed me the ledgers, taught me how to fill them out, and taught me all the inner workings of the meatpacking process. Every day after school, I would ride my bike over to the meatpacking place and do my homework in my dad's office. And when I finished, I would help my father out with the paperwork. My father did explain to me from a very young age that school was important and said that dropping out was not an option. And as much as I would love to quit and work for my dad, he wouldn't let me quit school. I also became friends with some young Italian kids who ran errands for the Chicago outfit. One day on my way home from the office, I ran into 2 young guys who asked me if they could hide in my storm cellar. I said okay, and they hid under there for about an hour before finally leaving. Sometime later that same week, I was on my way back, where I was stopped by a guy waiting by a black car. He told me how pleased he was that I let the guys hide in the storm cellar. And to say thank you, he gave me $200. That would be my introduction to organized crime. Over the next few years, I would be introduced to other mob guys by my neighborhood friends. And it was fun hanging out with the mob guys. I mean, they were flashy. All the good food and the women. I mean, it was like a dream. And at my high school graduation ceremony, Paul Ricca gave me a freaking silver ring to congratulate me. I mean, how cool is that? After I graduated, I decided to study business at the University of Chicago and would move out of my house and into my dorm. And in 1940, I graduated from college with a degree in business. But shortly before I could start my first business, a tragedy occurred. World War II had begun, and I, like many young men at this time, was forced to join the war effort. I was then sent by the US Army to North Africa, and was the guy the Army assigned to help keep track of the inventory. You know, who took what out of what inventory, and what time, or how much, that whole ordeal. While stationed in North Africa, I met Ahmed, a young herbalist from Morocco, who was part of a band of freedom fighters fighting the Germans. The two of us would become close friends and would eventually become business partners after the war was over. Ahmed and his family grew herbs used to make medicine and pharmaceutical products, and was renowned as some of the best makers of medicine in the city of Casablanca. When the war was over, and after a year of starting my trade mart, in 1947, I returned to Morocco with a business proposition for Ahmed and his family, and they accepted. Within the next 2 years, Ahmed and I grew our business of shipping herbs and pharmaceutical products to the United States, and made a fortune of over $12 million annually. And that's how the Solomon Trade Company was born. And by 1955, I had set up trade routes and business deals with 24 different foreign countries, including Cuba, Italy, Egypt, and India, just to name a few. I would also continue to do casual business with my mob associates. Nothing crazy or anything, as I didn't want to have the FBI snooping around where they didn't belong. This was also around the time I would finally get introduced to Clay Shaw, the head of the International Trade Mart in New Orleans. I met Clay sometime in the spring of 1955 when he came to visit Chicago. He was a very friendly guy, shook my hand, took me out to dinner, usual stuff. I must admit, I liked Clay from the start. He and I would do several business ventures together and visit many countries and would remain in touch for a very long time. And this is where the first piece comes into play. Was Clay Shaw a conspirator in the murder of President Kennedy? Was Clay Shaw an informant of the CIA? Well, the short answer is yes. Based on information I have, he absolutely played a hand in killing Kennedy. And Clay would also be the one who got me involved in the CIA. The CIA contacted me for the first time in 1957, asking about foreign relationships with Latin American countries, particularly with Cuba. Not much for them to go off of, as I was just mostly importing sugar and salt. I was also contacted by the FBI about ties to the Communist Party. And unbeknownst to the federal government at this time, I also invested heavily in the Havana deal and owned a percentage of one of the casinos down there, along with my associates of the Chicago mob, before Castro took over and kicked the mob out of Cuba. Things went pretty much the same for a while, until one fateful morning I received a telephone call. Sam Giancana, the acting boss of the Chicago mob, had recently made a deal with Joe Kennedy, the father, to help his son John with the upcoming election, and wants my help. Not that surprising of a deal, as Joe Kennedy made his fortune as a rum runner during Prohibition, and most likely kept in touch with mob associates over the years. This was a very big deal for the mob. The idea of having a president on their side seemed like a match made in heaven, and a great way to deal with the big bad wolf brother of his, Robert F. Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy was an absolute nightmare for the mob. He was absolutely relentless with going after figures in organized crime, particularly the previously mentioned Sam Giancana. I mean, this guy was a shrewd interrogator and was ruthless to my friends during the hearings of the McClellan Committee. He would sit on his pedestal and rip the defendant to shreds. I mean, Jesus, the nerve of this slimy bastard. As a favor to my mob friends, I helped them get Kennedy elected president. Nothing really that complicated. I publicly announced the trade company support and participated in various promotional bits in the newspapers and radio shows, even appeared on television on a special advertisement on one of the big channels. After all of that, and with the union votes in Chicago, the date in November finally arrived, and we waited anxiously for the results. It was a glorious day. John was the new president, and all my associates were celebrating the victory. But the celebration did not last for long, because John F. Kennedy appointed his brother Bobby as Attorney General of the United States, essentially giving him the governmental power needed to investigate and take down organized crime in America. There was never that big of a federal investigation into the mob at the time. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover wouldn't dare say the word mafia and claim it didn't exist. Of course, this was because the mob had dirt on him, having pictures of him in a cross-dress. And even I heard rumors that he had sex with certain individuals I'm well acquainted with. While the mob was furious that the Kennedys betrayed them, they wouldn't be the only ones to be pissed off. Anyway, sometime in late 1961, I was contacted a second time by the CIA under a top-secret contract to ship cargo and equipment from Chicago to New Orleans and eventually to Miami. The cargo was part of this ongoing war with Fidel Castro in Cuba. This war was being run by the CIA, and they were using private contacts with the military-industrial complex to train and fund this expensive operation in Cuba. All of this is top secret, of course, in order to protect our national security. But I would soon find myself going deeper with the CIA than the likes of my associate Clay Shaw. The CIA asked me to help make a deal with the mob, for them to help the CIA with the assassination of Fidel Castro, knowing they would be the perfect scapegoat. I was rather weary about this partnership being between the government and the mob, knowing the CIA is using them to fight their battles for them. I, however, couldn't refuse to help the agency. There was too much at stake for me and the trademark. Once you're connected to the CIA, you're connected for life, and they will not hesitate to kill you if they feel you are a threat to national security. So, the mob began to help with this top-secret war in Cuba, Operation Mongoose as it was known as. My associates in Chicago got me in touch with an associate in Dallas, who I haven't seen in years, Jack Ruby. Good old Jack used to be a gangster in Chicago and now ran this nightclub in Dallas, which was a rather popular place. Nice chicks, good food, that sort of thing. Anywho, spoke with Jack about the need for weapons in these training camps in Florida, as well as this upcoming invasion of Cuba. And within 15 minutes, Jack and I made a business deal, where he would run arms and other cargo from Texas to New Orleans. Over the span of a year and a half, I worked for the CIA as a middleman between organized crime and the agents. That was most of what I did, acting as a buffer for those who didn't want to be directly involved with the mob. And I was pretty good at it. The mob guys liked me, and were more than happy to do business with me. And with mob contacts, the CIA was able to start preparing another invasion of Cuba, and after the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, we couldn't afford another failure. Sometime in the summer of 1963, I received a phone call from Clay Shaw, who requested I come see him in New Orleans and have dinner with some of his associates. So I flew down there. When I arrived at the address Clay gave me over the phone, I soon realized that this was no ordinary dinner party. In fact, it was more like a top-secret gathering. Turns out the place belonged to a guy named David Ferry, some sort of hotshot pilot who was a leader of some group of anti-Castro fanatics. David was a rather friendly guy. He introduced me to everybody at this party, including Perry Russo, a mechanic who I believe was also a male prostitute, and of course Clay Shaw, not realizing we had known each other for a long time. He also introduced me to a person with a face I'll never forget, Lee Harvey Oswald. Strange guy. I mean, he seemed very quiet. Apparently he spent some time in Russia, and only just came back to the United States rather recently. After we all shook hands and met each other, the five of us would start drinking and talking in the parlor. Of course, Dave was the loudest and the most pissed. He started ranting about a training camp being shut down by the FBI, because Kennedy didn't want another Bay of Pigs incident. Of course, Dave was selected by the CIA to run the training camps, was of course furious that the president just fucked him over by shutting down his operation. It all started out as drunken stupidity, but then it started to get more serious.
I am so sick and tired of this guy. That communist son of a bitch is pissing all over this fucking country. Somebody needs to take care of this fucking bastard.
As I was listening to David rant, I noticed the cold stare in Oswald's eyes. He seemed intrigued, and there was this rather dark look about it.
How the fuck do you think we're gonna do this, Dave? What about the cops? What about the Secret Service?
It's not impossible. Gotta be swift, quick, in and out. We need to trap the wasp inside its nest. Shoot him with a high-powered rifle. That's not enough. We need to get him with a triangle crossfire to confuse the authorities. And somebody's going to have to take the fall.
Dave, I think you've had too much to drink. This is the goddamn president we're talking about here.
Yeah, and say we even get to John. The whole government is gonna be on top of us. How are we supposed to hide the truth from them? What makes you think we can just walk on out of this?
I don't know, but that son of a bitch is gonna destroy this fucking country if we don't do something.
I didn't think much of this conversation we had that night. I mean, it was just bantering, you know? Dave had a little too much to drink and got a little agitated. These things are common, you know? But sometime in late September, I received a phone call from an unknown person. The call was from somebody in Black Ops or military intelligence, I don't know which. But they called and told me to allow a team of operatives to run a top secret base in the basement of my trade company. There, until late December of '63, unknown individuals would come in and out of the basement with briefcases, stacks of paper, packages, among many other strange things. All the behind-the-scenes work of this assassination plot happened right in the basement in Chicago. The high-powered rifle Oswald used to shoot Kennedy was shipped from the mailing house down the street of the trade company. All of the coordination to ensure the truth does not come out was handled down in that basement. Most of those documents were destroyed. However, some important ones were sent overseas to a safe deposit box in Switzerland under one of my aliases. And I know this because I was ordered to put them there. Of course, I didn't know at the time that those documents contained information linking the CIA to the assassination. Anyway, on November 15th of '63, I was handed a letter by one of the guys from the basement, and told me that this letter contained information for Sam Giancana's eyes only, and that I must deliver it. So I did, and handed Sammy the letter at his favorite spot. That letter contained the go-ahead for Sammy to contact his mob associates for this audacious plot. Not much happened until the 22nd, mostly boring paperwork and figuring out various legal problems I've been dealing with for a while, but nevertheless, on the 22nd, I was in my office as usual.
Sydney, what is it?
I must say, at first I didn't believe it, but I came out to the lounge room, I sat in front of the television, and there he was. I saw Lee Harvey Oswald, the man I had met several months ago, in handcuffs, accused of shooting President Kennedy. Sometime later, my phone started ringing, and when I picked up the phone, a small voice spoke the following words.
Took care of that son of a bitch.
I knew at that point This was a conspiracy from day one. All of it. Kennedy refused to invade Cuba and wouldn't support Vietnam. The military intelligence and chief of staff wanted him gone. And the mob was furious because of broken promises of influence in the White House and not keeping Bobby quiet. And since the CIA already had mob contacts and both had mutual interest to get rid of him, they worked together. The next day, a man in a suit barged into my office and told me I had to leave immediately. Without any warning or being able to say goodbye to my wife and daughters, I was forced to get in the back of a moving van and leave Chicago forever. When I arrived at the safe house in Maine, I was tired and quite shocked. I mean, not being able to say goodbye to friends and family and having a completely new identity was quite disturbing. I was told by the man that I could never return to Chicago and that my family had been informed of my supposed death. As far as the agency was concerned, I never existed. I settled into my new permanent residence and began to watch the news from afar. Oswald's death, David Ferry's death, the Garrison trial against Clay Shaw, all of it. Years pass, until one day, by some weird circumstance, I receive a letter from an old friend in Chicago. The same one that I let hide in my storm cellar all those years ago when I was a teenager. He found out I was alive and told me a lot of dark secret information pertaining to the Kennedy assassination, and giving me some new information regarding Lee Harvey Oswald. After reading it, I buried the letter in an old drawer, and honestly, didn't bother touching it until today. After nearly 15 years of exile, I've now decided to document the truth. The death of Clay Shaw has forced me to confront the dark past once again, and waking up in the middle of the night to a nightmare has forced me to confess. I cried in my pillow for nearly 10 minutes because I stabbed him in the back. Many years ago, some kids were bullying me in the schoolyard, kicking me, giving me bruises, until another kid came up and stood up for me. That kid was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And this is what I give him for sticking up for me. I helped kill the same man who stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. So I decided it's time. I need to do this, to make things right for John. In January of 1960, just before Kennedy took office, President Eisenhower gave his farewell address to the nation. And in that address, he spoke of the military-industrial complex and expressed his genuine concern for the power and influence the complex have on our government.
May be tempted to risk his own destruction. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
I believe that this government has grown to rely on the income that the MIC brings in. And with money comes greed, and with greed comes corruption, and with corruption comes power. To many government officials, the military-industrial complex is like an umbilical cord, providing life. Only in this case, it's the worst addiction in the history of mankind. Power. Power is like a drug. It feels good, and it's hard to let go of. So, you're a government official in the Pentagon, and all of a sudden comes John F. Kennedy, who decides to make peace with the communists and create a new future for America. There goes those big bucks and your power. And don't underestimate the impact communism had on the American people. The public was scared of it, and the government was scared of it. With Russia building a growing arsenal of nuclear weapons and satellite technologies, Americans were scared of the loss of American freedom. The military and the CIA are scared of the full scale of nuclear war, and America falling to the hands of the communists. And when Kennedy threatens to destroy the CIA, the military advisors and officials become increasingly nervous. Jim Garrison knew there was a conspiracy to assassinate the president and tried to prove it in a court of law. Unfortunately, he made a very crucial mistake. The magic bullet theory. I don't know how this mistake came up, but there was no magic bullet. The chart Garrison used made a very crucial mistake in the seating arrangement of the limousine. Governor Colony was not sitting directly in front of Kennedy, but rather slightly to the left. This making Oswald's fatal shot very much possible. And yes, Oswald was indeed the shooter, and there was no second shooter in the grassy knoll. So the real plan worked something like this. From my company's basement, the rifle was shipped from Chicago to Oswald's home in Dallas. Oswald was actually not originally supposed to be the one to kill Kennedy. He was actually supposed to kill this former US general for the CIA, who was believed to be a treasonist plotting to take over the country. After he fails to do that, Oswald is then instructed to assassinate the president. And he does. Oswald is then supposed to get out a very specific route in a very specific way. Unfortunately, that stupid son of a bitch disobeys orders and heads back to his home. David Ferry had arrived ahead of time and was waiting for Oswald to arrive at the private airfield so he could fly him to Louisiana. And when he doesn't show up, David phones Jack Ruby, who had just received the word that Oswald, like the idiot he was, got arrested at a movie theater in Dallas and killed a police officer named J.D. Tippit. David then heads back to New Orleans and informs Clay Shaw, who then gets Oswald a lawyer. And knowing that Oswald might snitch, Jack Ruby is ordered to take out Oswald in any way possible, and shoots on live television. The conspirators die one by one over the years. David Ferry from natural causes, Clay Shaw of lung cancer, and Guy Bannister, the one who was running weapons to Cuban exiles, dies of a heart attack. The only two still alive are myself and Perry Russo. Russo, a male prostitute, was Garrison's star witness in the trial against Clay Shaw, and the court didn't take it all that seriously since his credibility was not that good, and I myself have managed to avoid the spotlight altogether. But now, the most important question of all, the final piece of the puzzle. What is the name of the person who ordered the assassination of John F. Kennedy? Who is the one who was pulling all the strings in the shadows? Well, the name is